Well, thank you for joining me for another iTWire video with top Australian IT executives. On my right, I have Lee Hickin. He is the Microsoft's commercial lead for the Internet of Things. In the middle, we have Mitch Denny. He's the Chief Technology Officer of Readify. And on the left, we have Tatham, Oddie. He is the CIO of Readify. And we were here today for a Beyond the Buzzwords Internet of Things event, which I'll put up on the internet a bit later on, but there's still a few more live versions to go. And we don't want to spoil that, so we're getting a little sneak peek today of what was being spoken about. So gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Now, just quickly start with you, Lee. Just give us a quick wrap of what it is you do in Microsoft, and we'll just get that quick wrap from all of you, and then we'll talk about the event, and then we'll talk about some other questions.
For sure, thanks Alex. Yeah, so my role is the commercial lead at Microsoft, and in that commercial lead role, I basically own the business of Internet of Things in Microsoft, in terms of the selling of it, the partnering of it, the building the business channel, and figuring out what customers really want from Microsoft in this space.
And you have been at Microsoft for 10 years.
10 years.
And so how long ago did you get into this role? Just recently?
This role started for me 2 months ago.
Right, so it's fresh. But I mean,
very much
Internet of Things, although it's been around for a long time, I mean, it's really taking off now.
Look, absolutely. Every page you open in every paper or every online article, it's about Internet of Things, which is great.
Yeah. And so, Mitch, give us the quick rundown of your job as CTO of Readify. And tell us what Readify does for those who don't know.
Sure. Well, I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Readify. My job is to be the geek. So I spend a lot of time looking at new and emerging technologies and figuring out how we can help people work with them. And that's really what Readify does. We help organisations adopt new technologies where it makes sense and leverage it. And
so, Tatham, just I mean, CIO, people know what CIOs do, but tell us what you do anyway.
Sure. So, well, CIO is interesting in a consulting firm anyway. So I'm internally responsible for the CIO capability within Readify, but also working with customers to help take Mitch's innovative, geeky ideas into how do we roll that out into a business scenario.
Sure. Now today we saw a demonstration of some of the various sensors out there, Edisons and Arduinos and Raspberry Pi 2s being used, integrating with Azure and putting data in, taking it out. But just start with Lee, can you give us a sort of a quick wrap of what it is you spoke about? And also there's a study that you put out, which I wrote about, I'll link to it, about how only 22% or 26% of IT businesses are considering IoT at all.
That's right, yeah, we did have a study out, and it did present some interesting numbers purely around the Australian market, around the numbers of users that are using it. I think the more interesting number there is actually the value that they're getting from it. So yes, small number using it, really high number of those customers are actually getting value from it, and a real tangible cost benefit.
And clearly, as more of people are getting this value, more businesses will use it, and it's a growing thing.
Look, and absolutely, that growing thing is the core to our message. It's really that Internet of Things is here, but it's the Internet of your things. It's starting with the things you can do today, and then building on that, and I think that was amplified a lot by what Mitch is talking about.
And so what would the biggest misconception be around Internet of Things, do you think?
Look, I think it's a hard thing to say, because obviously being the commercial leader for Internet of Things, I want to make sure that everybody's excited about the things, but I think one of the misconceptions is that you have to, you've got to stick a sensor in everything to really get the value out of it. The data is the valuable piece here. The data is king. Sure, the things are very important. They generate the data, but once you've got that data, that's when you're starting to see businesses, the light goes on, and they kind of figure out, well, that insight leads to that outcome, which leads to a change in our business, and that's the really powerful stuff.
And there was an example you gave where an Internet of Thing doesn't have to be a sensor. It could be your computer at the reception, which is scanning people coming in and out just through a webcam.
Absolutely. Everything is a thing in some way. If it generates data, if it captures information, if it in some way interacts with you as a business or your customers, it's a thing. It's generating something about your business, and you should leverage that to the best of your abilities. And then obviously, the boundaries beyond that are immense now in terms of what we can measure.
Did you have any misconceptions about IoT, Mitch, before you sort of got involved?
I think the problem I had with it was initially defining it. I think it took me
What is this thing?
Yeah, that's right. Everyone's talking about the Internet of Things. What is it?
Yeah.
And I guess the thing that was the most confusing for me when I got into it was, well, if you take each element by itself, they're things that we've been doing before. What seems to be different is the scale with which we're doing it. It's progressively increasing the amount of integration and the quality of the data that we're collecting.
Sure. Now, for those people who are going to be in Melbourne tomorrow, so I'll put this interview up later today, but you're also in Perth, and where's the other place you're still going to? Brisbane, yeah. So people will be able to see a live demo, you talking about, just give us the quick wrap of what you'll be showing.
Sure. So what I do is I take a sensor I've just built out of some commodity components, which reads the distance to the bottom of a fuel tank, theoretically.
Yep. And it could be lots of other different things, but that was the example that you had used.
I then transfer that data via Bluetooth to a mobile phone to work around some last mile connectivity issues.
And this because it was on a farm,
Yep,
and
farm, yep,
sometimes
it's
farms
somewhere.
don't have connectivity everywhere because they're usually far away.
That's right, that's right. And so the idea is that when the farmer then gets back within cell coverage range, the data is then transferred to the cloud, and we do some analytics on the stream of data that's coming through, and eventually get that into a format where we can analyse it in a tool like Excel.
And it was going through Azure, it was using, you had an events hub. I mean, people can come along and see the demo itself, but it worked. Ultimately, it all worked.
That's right, that's right. I only had a few bits where I had to quickly fix up my demo.
Well,
where,
it's demos, that's it.
That's what happens when you're dealing with wireless technology.
That's it. And Tatham, did you have any views on Internet of Things before you sort of started with this project?
I think one of the exciting parts to it is that it is so tangible and we're connecting to the physical world. But one of the misconceptions that sometimes creates is the idea that we have to go out and start doing electronics and building hardware. And some of what Lee was referring to there are the Internet of Your Things. A nice little example, we're, as a growing company, we're moving offices, and we were trying to work out how many people are in our offices. And I found the other day, just poking around in some of our wireless access points, that even if people don't connect to our network, they actually can send out a little API call to us every time someone dwells in the office. So now I've got this graph of exactly how many people are in all of our offices, and I just give that straight to our admin team to go and plan the facilities and the size of our office. And that's something where I didn't have to go and personally play with electronics.
And you didn't have to give tags to everybody either.
No, we're not having to scan people in. I'm not having to do crazy face recognition off webcams.
It was
in
using
hallways, or
data that was already
just
there.
where there's a device, it's on the internet, it's feeding me data, and now I can use that in some way. So yes, it's all about connecting software to the tangible world, which implies hardware, but we don't have to get into the electronic side of it.
Sure. Now I've got a few questions here, so we'll try and go through them relatively quickly just to respect people's time and your time as well. Thank you for putting up with all these questions. But another one was, what do organisations need to do before considering to install these new intelligent systems? Clearly there's due diligence, and they've got to investigate all this sort of stuff and come to demos and see things, but what would you say, Mitch?
I think they really need to have a real business case. Are you actually driving some kind of efficiency? Are you improving the user experience in your business? Is there some tangible business outcome that you're trying to get? And then look at the data assets that you've got within your business and figure out how to use that. I think that would be the biggest piece of advice I'd give to people.
Sure, Lee,
Well, look, it plays very much to, if you think about the core of data science operations as a role, the first thing that you set up is the goal. You start with where the endpoint is,
Yeah.
then you work back through the data, and that's absolutely, where the value of this is. You figure out what you're trying to do, and then figure out what data you need to do. Tatham's just got an example. What you want to do is figure out where people were, and you've already had the data. You didn't actually have to go and do something new. So yes, it's that simple, really.
Yeah, any comments?
Some of those entry-level scenarios, like the how many people are in our offices, they're sort of the easy ones where you can look at a problem that exists in the business already and then find, okay, reactively, this is how I can solve that. One of the things with Internet of Things, though, is as we get all these new opportunities, it's probably some of that goal identification is moving out into more of that sort of innovation space as well, of going, how might we look at growing our business into new markets or new services or new ways of delivery. So absolutely need to start with the goal, but often that'll maybe even start further back at kind of an innovation conceptual space.
Yeah, you got to be looking the right direction. So you wouldn't have actually come up with that idea without looking in the right direction. The scenario that we demoed today, we wouldn't have come up with it without actually going and talking to someone about what the actual problems were.
Yeah, I mean, in IT, you often have all sorts of, these days you have this shadow IT. 22% of business IT purchases are now made outside of the IT department because they're getting cloud services or this or that. So who's taking responsibility for IoT? Is it a group thing? Are you guys both, CTO, CIO? Is it marketing? Is it a board level thing now?
Yeah.
Like security is a board level thing now. I don't know if Internet of Things is, but
we did a survey a little while ago just to try and get a little bit of data on this, and what we found was that about half of the respondents to the survey said that it's the CIO's responsibility, but the other half broke up the responsibility amongst people like the CMOs and the COOs. I think that what that tells me is that it's going to actually be collaborative.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Because I think CIOs and CMOs have a stake in this stuff, but they need
for different reasons too
to tell them what's possible.
Yeah.
There's different levels there in the sense of you've got basic security in terms of are the devices trusted, is the transport trusted, and how does that integrate into our cloud and our office networks and all that sort of question. That's going to sit in your CIO space. But then increasingly, as we're collecting stuff right down to like my heart rate's getting sent up to Microsoft every couple of minutes and all that sort of stuff.
That's the Microsoft band.
Let me just check on his heart rate.
Yeah.
Hopefully they can't transmit the data back the other way and tell you what their heart rate should be.
To find the heart rate. And that's going to really drift up into privacy problems and all those sorts of things. And that's where other parts of the business are going to need to deal with that as well. So I guess security and who's responsible, we need to break that up. And that's where we'll get into that collaborative space as well.
And the report that I mentioned earlier from an Australian study perspective, it corroborates what Mitch is saying, that it is, the perception is it's the CIO's responsibility. But I think that what it does is it helps break down some of those barriers between the CIO and the CMO and line of business guys to say, well, actually, we do have a reason to talk here because I've got something that can help your business. It's not a CIO ivory tower problem, it's a business line problem that can bring the two together. So.
That'll probably come out in some of the tooling as well. So you'll have some tooling which is more oriented towards the IT people having the infrastructure. And you'll have some tooling which is provided for people that want to use the data.
So, I mean, clearly, given the fact that we now have a number of these different Arduino boards and sensors coming on board, and we've got the pervasiveness of cloud computing, I mean, it's everywhere now. All these low-cost data sensors, this is clearly making it much easier for people to roll out IoT infrastructure, to do tests, to experiment the way you were describing.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I mean, the cost model in Azure, you think about what Mitch is demoing, which you guys will get to see live, hopefully, at the events. A couple of little stream analytics works and a couple of event hub calls, we're talking, a few cents to do these things. It's really, that cost point is just so adoptive and easy to get into because of that.
Are there any examples of how you are using Internet of Things at Microsoft right now, Lee?
That's a good question. Look, we are doing lots of things. I mean, obviously, we have a lot of our own consumer technologies that we leverage and use, like
Microsoft Band,
which is. But internally, as a business, we use Internet of Things from a device and awareness of where our staff are. So one of the big problems we have in Microsoft, being a large global organisation, our staff move around the world a lot.
Yep.
We have significant health and safety regulations around managing staff movement, either on if they're on certain flights, if they're in certain countries, if they're in and out of certain buildings for our own global safety. So we leverage, a sort of an RFID tagging system for every employee with our badges.
Yep.
We obviously have our phones that we do awareness and, like Tatham's example earlier, Wi-Fi awareness of where people are. So we use all of that data. So when we have a global emergency, when such things happen, we can identify where everybody is pretty much immediately.
Yeah.
And so very quickly, Microsoft comes out with these sort of alerts to say, well, we know there are no Microsoft people involved, or we know there are 6 people from Microsoft in a certain place.
And from the pre-IoT buzz, I mean, Microsoft's been doing telemetry with Windows machines for a long time.
Since XP Service Pack 2 was, I think, where we really hit the road hard with our, mine's gone blank, but when we released the Windows, the precursor to the Windows Defender, and we started building in that, automating Windows updates.
Microsoft Security Essentials is what
essentially,
it is now.
all those engines, they start to build this telemetry that forms the basis of how we continue to build these things. So look, it's almost now, it's not even something we say, look, that's IoT. It's just core to our infrastructure.
And you were talking about in your presentation how one of the very first devices on the internet in 1990 something was a toaster.
Yes.
So,
yes, I've got.
And I remember coffee pots and things.
A gentleman
as well.
by the name of John from MIT put a toaster on the internet. There's an article I can send you the link to it. But yes, it was an interesting find.
And Mitch, any Readify IoT things beyond the things you're working on?
Well, obviously Tatham's finding some early scenarios for us at the moment. I've been mostly looking at what customers are doing. So I've been looking at how you can take hundreds of thousands of devices and start pumping data into the cloud, and that's been, I guess, surprisingly small dollars for all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
I guess
which is companies will be happy about.
Yeah, look, I did some modelling a little while ago for a particular organisation, and it's cheap to get started, and it's still cheap to be at full scale. So we're looking at doing some optimisation of scaling the environment up and down. And we looked at the price and said it's not worth it. so it's pretty cheap to get started.
Any comments from you, Tatham?
I think from a scale perspective, and especially linking back to the cloud, one of the interesting stats that I see is in 2008, we crossed this line between 7 billion people on Earth and 7 billion connected devices. And that's just a hockey stick curve at the moment. We are well beyond one device per person on the planet at the moment.
Yep.
So, like I've got a phone in my pocket, I've got a band here, I've got a laptop over there, all of that. So actually being able to ingest that data is where something like the cloud comes into being able to scale that up. Otherwise, we just wouldn't be coping with that number of devices. On the other side to that, we're going to have to be really good at how we manage consumer expectations and experiences around that. in that I now have to put firmware updates on my watch,
Yep.
and firmware updates in my Wi-Fi light bulb. And there was an article the other day that started to come out about antivirus on smartwatches.
Well, and of course the fridge that was sending out all the spam, part of the botnet.
We've got still a reasonable amount of work as an industry to make sure that experience is right, and we're not doing technology for technology's sake.
Yeah.
And where IoT can give us that connection to the physical world in a lightweight, cheap touch point where it doesn't need to have a lot of intelligence to it, it doesn't need to have a huge amount of compute power, it doesn't need to get the software updates as often or something like that, but it enables a cloud-first or a mobile-first strategy or something like that. Finding that correct balance is going to be really interesting for us.
I'm going to see if I can sort of merge these next three questions together into one, because I've got a couple personal ones after that. But manufacturers, ISPs, the public, the private sector, how should they collaborate to make IoT happen and accelerate it? And I mean, what would you, obviously Azure and some things you're demonstrating are examples of that being an appropriate IoT platform, but I mean, what advice would you give to those manufacturers, to people looking for an appropriate platform, and clearly that dovetails into how Microsoft and Readify can help businesses take advantage of it?
Yeah, I think in this presentation, Lee mentioned the things like the All-Seen Alliance and technologies like AllJoin becoming increasingly important. So for people that are building solutions in this space, I would say don't shirk on implementing the standards, because if you do that, then you're going to get improved compatibility. And a really good example is Bluetooth Low Energy. Bluetooth Low Energy introduces or supports a way of having standard communications between a sensor and, say, a mobile phone for things like heart rate monitors. So it's a completely standard attribute profile. So provided the people that are building things like smartwatches support that in a consistent way, well then I can choose any application I want to talk to that particular device. So I think it's really standing on some of the shoulders of giants.
And of course, in your presentation, Lee, you talked about how Azure is open, works with anything, works with Hadoop, and of course we just had IINet join the All-Seen Alliance, so an ISP is getting involved. But any comments from you on that?
No, look, I think you made the point there that from our perspective, obviously we're Microsoft, so we're a vendor, and we have a set of technologies that we
But now you're more open than ever before.
But we recognise that this world is going to be a world of heterogeneously connected devices, from physical to sort of traditional devices, and we have to build that open platform. But as Mitch said, not to the detriment of any kind of standardization. So yes, multiple platforms, multiple languages, multiple databases, but standardization in some of the connectivity, the languages, the APIs, the way in which we're sharing the information is critical. Otherwise, we'll hit a roadblock very quickly.
That's right. It's all the seams between the devices, I think.
And especially critical in the IoT space, in that standalone devices historically, or standalone applications, we survived in a little bit of a closed ecosystem type world because they would still deliver value on their own. If you've got a sensor running somewhere, it's pointless on its own until you can integrate it down to some form of business outcome. And that's not just about saying that this part of my car can talk to my phone or something, it's then actually getting that all the way back into fleet management systems and down into service bookings and true end-to-end integration across all of that. And if we can't achieve that, then we're not going to be delivering the outcomes.
I think the thing that's really exciting at the moment is that we're getting the capability of the devices is increasing so much that they can start to use some of the higher level protocols, which makes that back-end integration so much more easy. So you can have sub $30 computers that have a full IP stack that can talk to the internet.
Yeah, well, I mean,
that was a whole bunch of different bits and pieces.
Yeah, one of the announcements, of course, was that the Raspberry Pi 2 will be running Windows 10 or a version thereof for IoT.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Just to change tack, just very quickly, as the last two questions, I always like to ask the people I'm interviewing, what was the best piece of advice that you ever received to get you where you are today? Might not have anything to do with technology, but it just humanises and shares a bit of personal info about you. So we'll start with you, Lee.
Right, thanks. Look, it wasn't actually advice. I guess it's going to sound like a child abuse story, but my dad, when I was 17 years old, I worked for my dad in the family business, and he one day turned around to me and said to me, "You've got to get out. You've got to go and find your own path. You're not working here for the rest of your life. That's not the future for you." And I did. I joined the Navy, got into IT, and here I am. So for me, it was that wake-up call of, you can't follow in your old man's footsteps. You've got to take a different journey.
Sure.
Yeah, I got two actually. It's reminded me of one about my father. My father once said to me, "Mitch, I don't think there's any future in this computer stuff." So we have a chuckle about that these days. And the other one was one about being realistic, and it was a colleague once told me that things will take twice as long, cost twice as much as you first think.
Yeah.
So I think it's not so much that that's really the case. It's more about a dose of reality.
Yeah. And Tatham?
If we're reflecting on fathers, then it's his fault that I'm in this industry, because he taught me to program when it was raining one afternoon and we had to go and find some activity. But one of my favourite kind of, I guess, the pieces of advice is the idea of the term a semantic knowledge tree. So in that, if you're starting with base knowledge, it's kind of the trunk of the tree, and you've got to have the branches to put things on, the leaves of the knowledge, otherwise there's nothing for them to hang on. And I think especially going into really complex ideas like IoT, perfect example, we can be out there all the leaves, all the lovely ideas, but if you don't have all that base knowledge to hang it on,
The foundation.
it's not going to stick.
Yeah.
Very
So,
zen.
building up from there. The
Great
knowledge tree.
examples. Well, thank you very much. And just finally, is there any final message that you'd each like to give to iTWire viewers and readers, and to your potential and future current and future customers?
Definitely come along and see us in the remaining sites in Melbourne, Brisbane, and Perth. We'd love to have you in the room and ask some questions directly.
And is that Readify.com that people will subscribe? I mean, I'll have a link in the article anyway.
Readify.net.
Yeah, .net. Yeah. Any final messages from you?
Give this stuff a try. Basically, it's very, very achievable.
And Tatham?
There's a lot of questions at this stage, and I guess I'd open a conversation about any of it. So as organisations are going and approaching it, more than happy to have a cup of coffee, chat about that sort of stuff, so that we can explore what's possible.
Lee, Mitch, Tatham, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Cheers.